Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Eugene's March 28th, 2025 program, A History of Oregon Journalism, a conversation with Bill Sullivan. My name is Andrew Kallick and I'm City Club's president. We're coming to you from our home at the historic Wow Hall in the heart of downtown Eugene, and it's my pleasure to extend a warm welcome to Bill and also to all of you joining us here in person, online, and over the radio. Since 1990, City Club has been dedicated to our founding mission to build community vision through open inquiry. In accordance with our mission and purpose, we hope to help connect people throughout our community and across generations, identities, experiences, and perspectives. You are invited this week and every week to join us in this effort, to share your wisdom, learn something new, and take active steps to make a difference in this city and region that we love. Of course, we cannot do this work alone, so a special thank you to our Platinum, Community, and Diamond sponsors. The Eugene Area Chamber of Commerce, serving as a catalytic leader in creating a vibrant and diverse economy that drives economic opportunity and well-being. Kaiser Permanente, which exists to provide high-quality, affordable healthcare services and to improve the health of our members and the communities we serve. More information at www.kp.org. The University of Oregon has helped Oregonians question critically, think logically, reason effectively, communicate clearly, act creatively, and live ethically since 1876. More information at uoregon.edu. Lane Community College transforms lives through learning. LCC provides comprehensive, accessible, high-quality educational opportunities that promote student success. For more information, visit lanecc.edu. And thank you to the City of Eugene and to Lane County for their support as well. I'll now hand the microphone to Mary Layton, the coordinator of today's program. Mary.
Today's speaker, Bill Sullivan, is the author of 26 books as of 8:34 this morning. But he's so prolific that when I got to see him this afternoon, just before I got here, he said, no, it was 27. Many of his books are guides to hiking in Oregon. And oddly, because I am not a hiker, nor have I ever been one, I own almost all of Bill's books. In fact, on Monday of this week, when we were at the coast, my daughter Rose used my copy of one of Bill's guides to plan the day's adventure with two 14-year-olds in our group, to a place new to us all, and without any devices. I keep a small stash of guides for gifts to visitors, including the international students who stay with me most Septembers. Every year or so, Bill visits hiking trails he writes about and updates his books to reflect changes in conditions. But Bill doesn't just write hiking guides. He also writes Viking novels, mysteries, and short stories, and other nonfiction mostly about Oregon. His account of a 1,361-mile solo backpacking trek from the state's westernmost shore at Cape Blanco to the easternmost point in Hell's Canyon was published as Listening for Coyote. It was chosen by the Oregon Cultural Heritage Commission in 2005 as one of the 100 most significant books in Oregon history. He has also edited 3 books written by his father, J. Wesley Sullivan, the late editor of Salem Statesman Journal. That was definitely a labor of love, since editing is not his thing otherwise. My personal favorite story about Bill happened about 6 years ago. My older grandson was working on a 5th grade project about Oregon landforms. I didn't know Bill very well, but I did know he was personally acquainted with many of the landforms. With the teacher's permission, I invited Bill to talk to the students about some of his experiences of landforms. My goal was to make this assignment more than an academic exercise for kids, to show them that our state's features were worth seeing in person. Bill accepted the invitation and made that routine assignment come alive. Today, Bill will talk about some episodes in Oregon's newspaper history that make clear how passionate our journalists have been. Given that journalism was the family business, history is his avocation, and storytelling is among his gifts, Bill's presentation promises to be both fun and informative. Bill Sullivan.
Hey, thank you, Mary, and thank you to all of you for being here and listening. When I tell people that I write columns for Oregon newspapers, they often say they no longer subscribe to newspapers. They say nobody reads the paper anymore, that corporate greed killed journalism, that people get their news on the internet for free, that social media provides all the news they need. And then, interestingly, they may add the opinion that the news has never been as divisive as today. Oregon journalism has certainly changed, but I think it's been more divisive in the past, and it may have overcome bigger challenges than those we now face. The one thing that never seems to change is people's need for news. Or wait, there's one other constant, the complaint that all the news is bad. That's definitely old news. Let's start at the start. The indigenous people of Oregon faced the biggest news challenge of all. The tribes here spoke 28 mutually unintelligible languages as different from each other as Icelandic and Chinese. Perhaps no place on earth had such a severe polyglot problem. The tribes of Oregon dealt with this babel by creating a news language, Chinook jargon. Everyone in the Oregon country learned to speak this jargon as a second language. It consists of just 500 words borrowed from different tribes. The grammar is simpler than Esperanto. I could teach you this language in an afternoon. You'd recognize words like Saheli, Olali, and Muckamuck. My grandfather spoke Chinook as a boy in order to share news with the natives. Even with a common news language, the tribes in Oregon were divided by geography. They needed a broadcasting station. This became Celilo Falls, the great salmon catching center on the Columbia River. Everyone who was hungry for news, or salmon, met at Celilo Falls during the fish runs to trade stories in Chinook jargon. Many of the indigenous tales of coyote, whale, and thunderbird were later dismissed by pioneers as mythology. But the stories are actually a journalistic style, with coded news about events, gossip, sports, ads, comics, and history. Tales recalled the eruption of Crater Lake, for example, and warned of tsunamis on the Oregon coast. After wagon trains began bringing settlers on the Oregon Trail in the 1840s, the medium for news quickly shifted to paper. The first printing press in the American West began churning out copies of The Spectator in Oregon City in 1846. In 1859, Oregon became the 33rd state of the Union, a fact that actually helped split the Union because Oregon tilted the balance of slave-free states in favor of the North. By the presidential election of 1860, Oregon had a population of just 50,000 people. But we already had 19 newspapers. Eugene, with a population of 1,000, had 2 rival papers at each other's throats. Abraham Lincoln had won a scant 36% of the vote in Oregon in that election, but he had carried the state anyway because the Democrats had split their vote between 2 candidates. Lincoln lost Lane County by a landslide, largely because Senator Joseph Lane of Oregon was the vice presidential candidate running against him. Joe Lane was a local hero who had defused the Rogue River Indian War with diplomacy. One of Lane's protégés was C.H. Miller, a wannabe Eugene poet who later became famous as Joaquin Miller. In the depths of the Civil War, Miller bought Eugene's pro-South newspaper, the Democratic Register. Miller had earned $3,000 in gold riding the Pony Express in Idaho. He spent most of that fortune on what seemed a very risky investment. Oregon journalism was not for the faint of heart. After Lincoln's party won the midterm elections of 1862, the rival Republican newspaper in Eugene wrote, quote, "Union triumph! The ignorant mass of deluded followers of low-party hacks and designing unprincipled political hucksters are at last foiled in the county of Lane and decently and triumphantly defeated. While the Union arms are gloriously triumphant in the Atlantic states and Mississippi Valley, we have with unfeigned joy to record a less magnificent but not less glorious triumph of Union votes in Oregon. Lane County has at last concluded to right about face and march to the music of the Union. As soon as it was ascertained that we had carried Lane County by a Union majority of 60 votes, it was wait a minute. Just 60 votes? That's hardly a landslide. Miller responded in his Democratic Register with a plea to end the Civil War altogether. Alas, he wrote, our country revels in the intoxication of blood. News reaches of a great battle. The administration has won the victory. At least so we must publish. The eager people inquire, how many killed? We answer, thousands. They are wild with delight. Their minds have drunk the most baneful poison to the moral man, the intoxication of blood. Does that sound like Eugene, writing for peace? In reply, Asa Hell Bush, the editor of Salem's Oregon Statesman, commented, quote, the name of the miscreant and traitor who uttered the above quotation is C.H. Miller. As soon as his one-horse paper is busted up, he will be found skedaddling to the Southern Confederacy. Finally, Miller was roused to retaliate in kind. Traitor, do you say, he wrote, you cowardly, perjured, lantern-jawed, green-eyed Yankee? Scream traitor because a man dares to hope for the return of the peace and prosperity of our country? Go humble your diminished head in gunny sack and ashes, for no other penance can save the perjured villain that bestrides the editorial tripod of the Statesman. After the war, Miller admitted that his advocacy of peace had overlooked the violence of slavery. Instead of skedaddling to the South, however, he went to London and republished his Wild West poems there. To wild acclaim, Miller introduced the world to the concept of cowboys and Indians. The Englanders hailed him as the Byron of the Rockies. Hearing this, the editor of the Albany Democrat wrote, quote, C.H. Miller, ex-editor of the Eugene Register and ex-county judge of Grant County, has published a book of poems and become a man of fame in London. This fact makes us think no more of Miller, but much less of the Londoners. These are just words, you say. Early Oregon journalism was a battle of words. Well, if you believe that, why is there no college on Eugene's College Hill? Today, the University of Oregon is east of downtown, but College Hill is to the south. In the 1850s, the pro-South Kentucky Baptists built Columbia College on that hill. Their school was burned to the ground by a secret pro-North vigilante group, the Union University Association. When the Baptists rebuilt, the vigilantes burned it down again. The college president, M.J. Ryan, was convinced that the arson was inspired by Henry Kincaid, editor of Eugene's Republican newspaper. Ryan loaded his revolver, found Kincaid downtown in Belshaw's drugstore, and shot him across a glass case at a distance of 8 feet. He missed. Ryan fled to the Confederacy, where he became a colonel and was killed in the first battle of the Civil War. Oh, you say, but that's only in Eugene. No. In 1871, the editors of Roseburg's two rival newspapers, the Ensign and the Plain Dealer, met for a shootout in downtown Roseburg. No one died, but they were both wounded. So why do Oregon newspapers now seem to be in decline? Is the problem corporate greed? Well, 100 years ago, you could in fact get rich by owning a newspaper. The editor of the Oregonian, Henry Piddock, built a mansion in 1914 that's still a tourist attraction in the Portland Hills. In those days, everyone read the morning paper at breakfast. Anything that happened by noon was sure to appear in the afternoon paper. Journalism was such a glamorous career that Superman chose it as his day job. Kids didn't dream of becoming astronauts. They dreamed of becoming ace reporters and getting the scoop. Then came television. Radio news had weakened the afternoon dailies, but the CBS evening news killed them. Why read the evening news when you could watch it? By the end of the 1950s, almost every American household had a TV. There were only 3 channels. Walter Cronkite ruled, but the news on ABC and NBC was pretty similar. Morning newspapers survived only because no one wanted to watch television at breakfast. Throughout Oregon, afternoon papers began merging with their morning rivals. That's why most newspaper names are hyphenated. The Eugene Daily Guard joined the Morning Register in 1930 and eventually switched to a morning format as the Register Guard. Other merges created the Corvallis Gazette-Times, the Albany Democrat Herald, and the Roseburg News-Review. Salem's afternoon daily, the Capital Journal, held out until 1980 before finally merging with the morning Oregon Statesman. My father, J. Wesley Sullivan, was the last editor of the Statesman and the first of the newly combined Statesman Journal. In his day, my father considered the front page to be every good citizen's morning briefing. He'd pack that page with 15 or 20 articles that he thought everybody should read. Pretty much everybody did. As a result, most people really were on the same page. The flaw in that system, of course, was that newspapers back then were written almost entirely by white men. Women were only allowed to write the society column. After the Cultural Revolution of the 1970s led to the founding of alternative weekly newspapers, Oregon journalism became a lot more diverse. Eugene Weekly and Willamette Week ran articles about race, gender, and the environment. Today, more of Oregon's journalists are women than men. But alternative weeklies were not what sapped the finances of mainstream newspapers. The big blow came in the early 2000s when most households acquired a computer connected to the internet. Traditionally, only 25% of a newspaper's income had come from subscriptions. Another quarter came from classified ads. Fully half of a newspaper's income depended on display ads from grocery stores, car dealerships, and department stores. The classified ads were the first to go. Why pay for a want ad when you could sell your car by placing a free notice online? Craigslist and Angie's List swallowed a quarter of the newspaper's income. Next went the display ads. Businesses began shifting their advertising budget to pop-up ads on Amazon, Google, and Facebook. By 2018, 3/4 of a newspaper's income had vanished. To make ends meet, the papers fired staff and shrank in size. Outraged readers canceled their subscriptions, cutting newspaper income still further. Some papers responded by switching to an online format with a paywall. Readers rebelled again. Why pay for an online subscription when Google can pirate most stories and give you the news for free? It's tempting to blame greedy newspaper corporations for these changes, but in fact, Gannett's stock has lost 90% of its value in the past decade. The money didn't go there. It went to internet tech companies that don't have any journalists at all. This doesn't mean we're in a news desert. By my tally, there are 200 professional journalists working in the KLCC listening area. KLCC itself has a news staff of 12, supported mostly by donations. KEZI Television has 14, and KVAL has 17. The Register Guard only has a news staff of 11 in Eugene these days, but together with its sister paper in Salem, they employ 29 journalists, the most of any local media. These are the reporters who go to city council meetings and state house debates so you don't have to. Altogether then, the local media employs about 200 journalists. 72% of them are investigative reporters, 25% are fact-checking editors, and 3% are editorial commentators. That last number is telling. Oregon journalism used to be mostly about editorial commentary. In the 1860s, journalists shot each other over editorials. Today, it's hard to find a paper that even prints letters to the editor. Why? The internet stole those jobs as well. Social media may have 0 investigative reporters and 0 fact-checking editors, but it has millions of editorial commentators. What's been lost? Well, nothing, according to a friend of mine. She's a 40-year-old Eugene college-educated woman who doesn't subscribe to newspapers. She doesn't watch TV or listen to radio news, so I'm guessing she won't know I'm talking about her now. She claims to get all the news she needs from Meta, Facebook, and X, Twitter. People there post about everything important, she says. So, last year, I asked her about the top 2 local news stories of the year. For what crisis, I asked, had Oregon's governor declared a state of emergency and demanded $500 million? My friend didn't know. The answer was homelessness. Next, I asked what she and her neighbors were now allowed to build in their backyards because of a zoning change. She hadn't heard reports of city council meetings, so she didn't know that she could now build a house in her backyard. Single-family zoning was eliminated to increase urban density. The people of Oregon are no longer on the same page because they don't read the same front page anymore. This is both good and bad. It's great that our information sources are as diverse as we are. If you only want to hear news about Disney movies or bird watching, you can. But it's sad that we've lost common ground. Oregon journalism has changed a lot over the years. It may seem divisive now, but it's been worse. Journalists face challenges, but that's nothing new. The one constant I've found is that the news is always bad. No, I didn't mean that. The one constant is that people really, really want to know the news. And so that's where my presentation on the history of journalism in Oregon is supposed to end. But I just know somebody's going to ask about the future, and that's tricky. News allows us only to guess where we might stumble next. One recent development is the rise of donor and subscriber-supported news sources. These follow the model of public radio news, providing news online or on the air for free while asking for donations. Subscribers who donate often have access to more news. In Salem, for example, a wealthy real estate magnate kickstarted the Salem Reporter, an online newspaper that has 3 reporters and has become a popular source for news from the state capitol. Subscribers pay $10 a month. In Eugene, a similar online newspaper, Lookout Eugene Springfield, is being organized by Ken Doctor, a graduate of the U of O School of Journalism, who published the Willamette Valley Observer in Eugene in the 1980s. After that print newspaper was replaced by What's Happening, later Eugene Weekly, Doctor worked as a journalist for several large newspapers back east. When he retired, he took his pension to Santa Cruz, California, and founded an online paper, Lookout Santa Cruz, hiring a staff of 20. They won the Pulitzer Prize for breaking news last year by providing free reports during the catastrophic floods of an atmospheric river. Doctor says he was approached by Eugene friends who were dismayed by the decline of the Register Guard and was asked if he could start an online paper here. Doctor said he would need $4 million in donations to hire a staff of 20 in Eugene. Local donors, including the Tykeson Family Foundation, have now contributed that much. Doctor met with me recently to ask if I would be his editor. I said no, but I might eventually write a history column for him. First, I had a question. Who owns Outlook? Doctor hedged, saying that Outlook was a public benefit company. He said it couldn't be a nonprofit and still run editorials. Okay, I said, but who owns Lookout's company? Doctor finally admitted that he himself is the sole shareholder. He could cash the $4 million in donations and walk away. He could sell Lookout to Gannett and keep the profit. He says he won't do this, and I believe him. He's a journalist with his heart in the right spot. But he's also in his 70s. Who knows what his heirs might do? With a launch date less than 2 weeks away, Lookout Eugene Springfield currently has a news staff of 7. I want them to succeed. I plan to subscribe at the announced rate of $188 a year. More local journalism is a good thing. But do I think another online newspaper will bring back the glory days of Oregon journalism? No, I don't. Both because that glorious past never existed, and because of what I learned recently at a Sons of Norway dinner. I was invited to the Thor Lodge in West Salem to give a talk about my series of historical novels set in the Viking Age. I love clubs like this. The people there are friendly, honest folks. Despite their interest in Norway, they're about as American as you can get. During the potluck dinner conversation, at my table, the conversation turned to newspapers. Everyone agreed that they canceled their subscriptions. There was no need to pay for investigative reporters and fact-checking editors, they all said, when you can get the news you want online for free. At this point, the man next to me thumped the table and said, as if this were somehow related, "They don't even teach cursive handwriting in the schools anymore." A woman across the table responded in a low voice so that we all had to lean closer. "There is an entity. I can't say who these people are out loud, but there is an entity that is blocking our schools from teaching cursive." When I asked why, she replied, "So that our children will not be able to read the Constitution." There were so many things wrong with this theory that I didn't know what to say. And that was the moment when I realized Oregon journalism may be, in fact, facing its biggest challenge ever. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill. Your comment about folks getting upset and violent with each other for editorials reminded me of a great family story of mine. I'm from Massachusetts, as many of you know, but the Callocks did come west at some point. In fact, one of our breed, Isaac Callock, was actually the mayor of San Francisco, and he got there in a fairly roundabout way. In fact, when he was running, the San Francisco Chronicle's editor-in-chief, a guy by the name of Charles DeYoung, was backing another candidate, and DeYoung, with the hopes of taking Callock out of the mayoral race, accused my ancestor of having an affair. So naturally, my ancestor, Isaac, responded by accusing Charles's mother, Amelia, of running a brothel. From there, they decided that the most manly thing to do would be to have a duel in the street of San Francisco, in which the editor shot my ancestor twice. But ever fortified by his New England stock, Callock survived the assassination attempt, went on to be elected mayor of San Francisco. And then the following year, his son, Isaac's son, ended up going into the San Francisco Chronicle offices and shooting the editor himself. So really, we have come a long way. See, that's the idea. We're a long way from that. We will begin question and answer in just a moment, but first, a special thank you to our award-winning public radio station, KLCC FM 89.7, for airing City Club programs Monday nights at 7 p.m. For those listening at home or in the car right now, your household is one of several thousand tuning in to City Club on KLCC, and we love that you're here. You can also find all recent City Club programs archived on KLCC, as well as on our YouTube channel and as podcasts. We'll take a brief break before coming back for questions with Bill. Thanks. Okay. Yep. Yeah. Welcome back to the City Club of Eugene and our conversation about the history of Oregon journalism with Bill Sullivan. This is our question and answer session.
Hi, Bill Kleppinger, City Club member. Thanks, Bill. I learned something. That's a good sign of a good speaker. We watch OPB, and last night there was a story on news outlets, and it was a display of red, conservative, online news outlets and blue ones. And some were little dots, small ones, and others were big ones. And 80% of them were red. And I couldn't help but wonder why. Why are there so many red conservative news, online news sources?
That's a good question, and I'm not sure of the answer. I'm thinking, though, that if you control the media, you control what people hear and what they think and believe. And the question is, how many of these are employing real journalists, and how many are employing just talk show podcasters who haven't actually checked any facts? And that, for me, is, it doesn't matter whether it's red or blue. A real journalist, my father always said, tells the truth and keeps his word and checks the facts. And you've got an editor who checks that too. And so it doesn't really matter if it's red or blue if they're telling the truth. And I don't know what that says. But I'll tell you, in the Civil War, there were a lot more Republican newspapers than Democratic ones, but the Republicans were the radical liberals, and the Democrats were the conservatives. So go figure.
Hello, Bill. I'm Lanny Ball.
Come right up to the mic, Lanny. Thank you.
Hello, Bill. I'm Lanny Ball, member, City Club, from Cottage Grove. I'm up here to uplift the newspaper deal. Now, I'm very thankful for newspapers. I remember when I was 12 to 14 years old, I was rolling these advertising papers up and putting them in a machine to tie them and boxing them up. We got, I think, a penny a piece for them. So there was money involved there. Also, I used to collect the comics and made me an album out of those. And if I had that today, it'd probably be worth millions. And also, we were able to, they had a deal where we could draw little art things, and I made it into the Oakland Tribune, my picture. And it was believe it or not, it was a space car. Probably a prophetic deal of Elon Musk and some of his stuff. And also, I'm an Uber driver here in Eugene and Springfield, and I've had riders hiking all the way from Mexico or somewhere up here, and he wanted to ride to the bus station for some reason. And so I'm going to learn about your trails too. And that's basically it. I just enjoyed newspaper, and I've been contemplating rebuying, subscribing to local papers and stuff.
All right, well, thank you for your stories. I delivered newspapers as a kid. I mean, everybody did back then if you wanted to make a little extra money. There's still a special thing about print. The Eugene Weekly gets 16, 24 pages of print out every week, and people snatch up 27,000 copies a week to line their bird cages. But no, there's something special about print. Yeah, go ahead. And here comes Joe Blakely.
Yeah, Joe Blakely, Eugene, visitor here. I'm going to ask you about your letter to the editor to the Weekly, and it scared me to death because it said that they might privatize the park blocks downtown, and that that's where Saturday Market has functioned for over 50 years, and it kind of scared me when I read that. And then at our table, it was kind of discussed, and people thought maybe it was an April Fool's joke.
No, it's true, but not the whole park blocks. It would just be one little fragment, the unpaved parking lot beside Farmers Market. And the city proposes to build an apartment complex there instead of leaving it as a parkland, which was the original purpose. But yeah, the whole, this is why we have newspapers and letters to the editor, so you have these discussions and issues like this come out. And you can talk about whether it's a good idea to have a central park in downtown Eugene, as our city founder, Eugene Skinner, dreamt. He donated the land specifically for that. Or if you should cannibalize it and sell it off as apartment buildings, or put a city hall there, try to squeeze that in. That's been tried twice and failed. So yeah, let's talk about these things.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Martha Ravitz, longtime City Club member, and I wanted to thank you for your very informative and entertaining talk. And I wanted to ask if you'd considered the newspaper rivalry between Abigail Scott Duniway, and she founded her nursepaper, I think the New Northwest, in the 1870s to promote the idea of women's suffrage, and her brother, Harvey Scott, then had the Oregonian in Salem and opposed women's suffrage. So they had, again, this rivalry and opposing views, and thank goodness she prevailed. But I think that's, and Oregon became, I guess, the 7th state to adopt women's suffrage, and she got to be the first person to vote in that election, or at least the first woman. So I think that we have women participating in journalism for a good long time in Oregon and making real strides.
Yeah, you're right. And that rivalry between Abigail Scott Duniway and her brother, Harvey Scott, is part of the story in the book that I wrote, a historical novel about pioneer Eugene called A Deeper Wild. And it's mostly about Joaquin Miller, who was the editor of the Register in Eugene during the Civil War. But it's also about his wife, Minnie Miller, Minnie Myrtle Miller, who divorced him and then fell in with Abigail Scott Duniway and wrote editorials promoting women's rights and the women's right to vote. They were both crushed by Harvey Scott and the Oregonian, and it was another 40 years before women got the right to vote. Abigail Scott Duniway was a tottering old crone by the time she finally cast the first ballot in Oregon. So it wasn't always a victory. The powers that be more often won. And in my historical novel, A Deeper Wild, that tells the story of pioneer Eugene, I don't sugarcoat it. Joaquin Miller is not necessarily a nice person, and his wife was, but was really humiliated by him and did not win during her lifetime. So these battles back in the Civil War, some of them are still being fought.
Question about Abigail Scott Duniway makes me want to slice in one of our questions from online audience, which is from KEPW Radio, actually. And their question is, are there other monuments to journalists in Oregon in addition to the William M. Tugman State Park? William M. Tugman lived from 1893 to 1961 and had a great saying, he served the public by always seeing beyond tomorrow. And so the question is, have we memorialized journalists in any other way?
At the University of Oregon, they have a wall of fame, and they induct a new honoree each year of Oregon journalism. And so a lot of these names that we've talked about, you'll find there, but otherwise not so much. Nationally, the monuments are typically these big old mansions. If you go down to California, the Hearst Castle is this incredible, opulent, obscene thing that's cannibalized art from all of Europe and stuck it in this mission-style thing to glorify William Randolph Hearst, who was a powerful newspaper magnate. In Oregon, we have the Pittock Mansion, which is a big tourist attraction. It has 20,000 square feet, built in 1914. It had an elevator. It had central vacuum cleaning. It was a marvel of what money could buy using newspaper dollars back then. But in terms of statues, other than the Tugman Park, not much. Alton Baker Park. Okay, there we go.
There we go. Alton Baker
yeah,
Park.
Alton Baker Park in Eugene would honor the editors of the Eugene Register Guard.
Hi, Bill. Thank you very much for helping us today. I'm Paul Thompson, a longtime City Club member. I'm hoping that the rise of the electronic versions of news and so on will serve to suck younger people into determining what's going on in the world around them and so on. And part of the equation of them being able to listen to the news and to evaluate it is a background in civics classes and critical thinking and so on, which have largely disappeared from at least the public schools and so on. So I wondered if you might just comment on how you think the ability of youngsters to be able to digest the news that comes to them and evaluate it will occur in the future.
You're right. Critical thinking and analysis of the news used to be a part of every high school English class. Here's Betty Taylor, who taught high school English, and I'm sure could verify that. But now, Lookout Eugene Springfield has an important community outreach program. They're going to provide free subscriptions to all of the schools so that and have the news then in as part of the curriculum in schools. And the Eugene Weekly is doing this in a different way because they also publish Savage Love. They can't actually get their newspaper circulated in high schools because it's a little raunchy and racy at times, but they employ lots of interns. And Camilla Mortensen, who runs that paper, teaches at the university and is a mentor for the LCC newspaper, and the Emerald got it back in print, and working with lots of young journalists so we'll have a new generation of people who are critical thinkers and also fact-checking editors and investigative reporters in the old mode. So there's still truth out there, but it takes a little looking to find it now.
Thanks, Paul. Betty.
Betty Taylor, City Club member since 1990, longer than Paul Thompson. And this wasn't my question originally, but I wonder what makes a person a tottering old crone? As an old person, I wonder, am I a tottering old crone?
I'll let you answer that.
Thank you. No, I was surprised that you called somebody that.
Yeah, that was surprising and in poor taste.
Okay, my real question was, what do you think about the future of the Eugene Weekly? I know that it was very effective at one time when Kesey Square was in danger of being dug up to become an apartment building. I talked to Anita Johnson. She publicized it, and there was a big outcry, and we saved Kesey Square. So I wonder if under the new ownership or the new, do you think the Eugene Weekly has a good future ahead?
I do. And I think Lookout and all of these papers actually are are tackling important questions. Even the Register Guard has gotten back the letters to the editor. On Sunday morning, they have that, and they will have op-ed pieces, so local editorials. That's coming back by popular demand. And Lookout has a very important part of their paper is letters to the editor. And Eugene Weekly, that's the one everybody reads, because, 9,000 people subscribe to the Register Guard now. At its peak, it was 60,000. But there are 27,000 that pick up that Eugene Weekly every week and read the dang thing. And who knows how many are going to get Lookout, the new online paper. A lot of people haven't even heard of it yet, but it's coming April 10th, and we'll see what it does. But altogether, I think all of these are raising important questions, getting public comment on issues like saving Kesey Square or saving the park blocks. Nobody ever, history never said, wow, it was sure a bad idea to save that park. So I think reminding people of that in print is not a bad idea.
Hi, Bill. Craig Opperman, City Club member, not quite as long as Betty, I don't think. Quite a track record, Betty. Thanks so much for your talk today. It was great, and I appreciate all your work, as I got to tell you earlier. My question, or what I struggle with all the time, is how do we know that the facts are the facts? And you hear about fact checkers, and I even heard a major network with a political leader talking about there's facts and there's alternative facts. How do we get to where the facts are, have some assurance of some objectivity?
Well, Mark Twain said that facts are pretty hard to work around, but statistics are flexible. So I think it's not the facts always that are at issue, it's how you spin them. And you can, for the same statistic, you can show that that drug use in Oregon has skyrocketed, or that it's actually going along at an ordinary pace. It's just the opioid crisis that finally got to Oregon. So depending on which statistic you use, you can say, oh, we need to criminalize marijuana, or no, it's doing just fine. We just need to get down on the opioids. There's facts, and then there's and statistics, and then there's what? Damn statistics.
It's just that blur between opinion and fact. And people say their news when they're giving opinion, and it's just such a struggle.
It is a struggle between opinion and fact. In real journalism, there's a sharp line between the newspaper part of the news and the editorial page. On the rest of the newspaper, not supposed to have opinions, it's supposed to be facts. But when you're doing podcasts and online stuff where it's all mixed together, it can be harder to make that distinction.
Mary Layton, a City Club member. So we talked a little bit about this before the show started. I'm curious about your career path. Clearly you were going to be a writer. What kind of a writer was the question? Could you just talk a minute or so about how you came to write the full breadth of things that you write now? Because they're definitely different kinds of things.
Yeah, sure. As I said, my father was a newspaper editor, and so I always grew up sort of thinking I'd be a writer of some sort, but I didn't want to get in the newspaper business because those guys work hard. This is why they're having trouble hiring people for Lookout, because it's grueling with deadlines. I remember in his office, my father's office, most of the other editors and reporters died young of ulcers and alcoholism from the stress. It really is a stressful job. So I thought, I'll be a freelance writer. I'll write fiction. I'll become a famous novelist, and studied creative writing at Cornell and wrote a novel. And guess what? A first-time novel by an unknown author, nobody buys it. It takes a while to get name recognition. So after writing several of those books, I started writing hiking guidebooks. Now, I don't hike any more than anybody else here, really, or didn't. Just, go hiking as a kid. Everybody does in Oregon. But there was a need, not just for hiking guidebooks, but for guidebooks that you could read. The trick is not to just tell where it is, but to tell a story so that you want to do it. And that was where it paid for my other works. And so now I've written more books that are not about hiking than that are. And they're picking up and starting. I'm better known in a lot of places for my historical novels and murder mysteries than the hiking books. And maybe we'll see. As I get even older, may have to do that entirely. We'll see. Yeah.
One of the public policy issues that's come up in terms of media, both in the present day but also in the recent past, is public support for the press. On the one hand, there are some concerns that public support will erode trust that certain elements of the community might have in a particular source. On the other hand, some people insist that the government should support media because it's important for preservation of democracy, say. Do you have an opinion on how or if the government should support the press and what, beyond the First Amendment, the government's role should be?
Well, we live in one of the few countries in the world that does not support the media by the government very well. Throughout Europe, for example, there are several television stations and radio stations that are funded primarily by the government, but given free rein to have their own editorial policies and do their own reporting. Here, it winds up being a political issue, and a lot of newspapers and online sources could benefit, I think, from a little neutral funding from the government, and then we have to wind up picking up the slack. We're doing that here already with charities picking up, churches doing work that should be done by the government. And so this means we're going to have to support journalism ourselves. And that means paying for that online subscription, maybe going back to paying for a paper and picking up Eugene Weekly and then maybe advertising in it. So we have to support journalism if the government won't, in order to keep the press free and prosperous.
Very good.
Hi, Bill. Excellent presentation, as usual. My name's Sue Walling. I've been a City Club member for a while. I guess I'm as guilty as anybody because I have a hard time coming up with a question that isn't actually sort of an editorial. Yeah. But I'm just wondering, in this age where it seems like people choose their own facts, and that disinformation repeated often enough becomes a fact sometimes. I mean, so whether it's that vaccines cause autism, or who won the election, or how big the crowd was, it's like, when people are choosing their facts, is there a way to can we get back to a common ground of what is true?
Boy, again, I don't have an answer for that, but it is true that if you repeat a lie often enough, people will start believing this. This was exactly the strategy of Hitler's publicity man, Goebbels. He said, it doesn't matter if it's true or not, just keep saying it, and eventually people will start believing it.
Okay.
But this is why we need journalists to check
Yep.
and remind us that not everything that the politicians or the government says is necessarily based on fact, even if we've heard it over and over again. I don't have a better answer than that.
Reminds me of when Jerry Seinfeld is having to take a lie detector test, and he asks his friend George Costanza, how am I going to pass this thing? You're the best liar I know, George. How am I going to pass this thing? And Costanza looks at him and says, Jerry, it's not a lie if you believe it. So,
Yeah. And again, Mark Twain, he said that it's always easier to tell the truth because then you don't have to remember what you said wrong.
There you go. Another question.
Jerry Morcello, do you feel that within the next 4 years there are any daily newspapers in Oregon and Washington State that might attract federal censorship?
Wow. Federal censorship. That would surprise me a lot, but then I've been surprised over and over. Gosh, this happened in the Civil War. You're not supposed to be able to shut down a newspaper because of what they said, but Joaquin Miller's newspaper, the Democratic Register, was closed to the mails by the U.S. military. And because 99% of their subscriptions were by mail, it shut the newspaper down. And he was given the option, if he wanted to use the newspaper, the mails, he could either write only poetry or he could repeat the press releases that came out of the Republican administration. And he chose to write only poetry for 2 weeks and then went back to printing pro-South articles in favor of peace. He said, let the South go. It's not worth losing this much blood over. But yeah, the government has a way of cracking down, even when it's in our Constitution, that the press has to be free. So I don't know of an example of a daily in Oregon that is facing this. But, as I said, I've been surprised over and over. It could happen.
One more question for you, Bill. Kathleen, you have one for us.
One more.
Great.
Kathleen Willett, I'm a member of City Club. To that point, the federal investigation of PBS and NPR is going on right now, and I don't think that's very pleasant for PBS and NPR.
Yeah.
They haven't been shut down, but let's keep our fingers crossed.
Well, it's Stephen Colbert who said, the truth has a liberal bias. Yeah.
We have time for one more, and that is that you have mentioned that many people today get their news, say that they get their news from Facebook or another social media platform. Another group of people increasingly get their news from AI chatbots. I have many colleagues, I work in technology, a lot of younger colleagues who come to me and says, ChatGPT said this, and I said, well, what sources is ChatGPT using? And they sort of look at me askance. And they say, it's ChatGPT. And I say, well, what's under the hood? And so the question for you is, how do we collectively demystify what journalists do? Because I think one part of the distrust might be simply a lack of understanding of what this profession actually is, what the craft is, what the values are. So how do we do that collectively?
That is a real issue because ChatGPT collects information that's anywhere on the internet and then digests it and spits it back out. But sometimes it makes up things too. You can ask it to write a novel and it'll do it using plots from everybody else. Lawyers get in trouble with this all the time. Several have been disbarred because they, in court, gave examples of cases that really back up their case beautifully, but it turns out were invented entirely by AI and don't exist. And so this is the problem with a lot of the news you get that has been digested by AI. When you digest food, it comes out different.
What a great place to end. Please join me in thanking Bill Sullivan. This has been our March 28th, 2025 conversation at the City Club of Eugene. Next week, we will return for a forum on Eugene's beloved Bach Festival, where we'll hear from one of the Bach Festival's new artistic partners about the evolution of Bach's music, its influence on contemporary composition, and the importance of performing and protecting classical music and the performing arts in today's world. So maybe if you bring your favorite orchestral instrument, we can play the greatest hits together. For now, have a great weekend and see you soon.